I wouldn't be surprised if you're among the people who would like to do some home improvement or some upgrades outdoors or upgrades around the house, and you're finding that lumber prices have basically skyrocketed, gone up to double, triple, even more the cost that they were at the beginning of 2020 before this pandemic began. So we're going to take a look at that. We're going to take a look at what caused that, and more importantly, we're going to take a look at when we think those prices are going to come back down and what the factors are that are involved in them going up and later coming back down. So we're going to look at the supply side, the lumber supply side. We're going to look at the demand for lumber and what's driving the demand for lumber and how the supply shortage and the large demand are leading to high prices. We're going to talk about some other factors that are affecting the prices and the supply of lumber. And then finally, we're going to look into the future as to what we think is going to happen economically and what we think will happen with your lumber prices in the future. First, let's talk about the supply side. When the pandemic first hit, you remember February, March of 2020, it wasn't long before the economy came to a screeching halt. The brakes were slammed on. And what happened was factories shut down, as you know, grocery stores, everything, the whole supply side was disrupted. In fact, it was stopped. And the same thing is true in the lumber industry. At first, the lumber yards and the production capacity, everything stopped while we figured out how to deal with COVID and how to do production within COVID. Then the lumber yards figured out a way to get production started again. And so they began production, but they began production and ramped up slowly. And I think that's true of most industries where they were figuring out how to do that. They were figuring out how to stay COVID safe, but still, not have COVID outbreaks in their lumber yards, etc. So they were very slow in starting back up. And even after they started back up, they anticipated that there was going to be a big economic downturn that was going to last a while, and that was going to affect the building industry. And so they didn't anticipate very much of a demand. So also, with them anticipating less lumber, the reality became that builders were building less because the builders were in the same situation as the lumber yards and as many other factories, and that is they curtailed their operations or greatly cut them back. And so there wasn't a lot of building going on at first. Then there's the demand side. Even though home building slowed down, at least for a while, and the building industry anticipated that, and so did the lumber industry. On the demand side, there were some factors that were working exactly to the opposite of that. For one thing, people were working from home. And when they work from home, they need to make changes to their environment to make it more comfortable to work. They notice how old the kitchen is, they notice how old the hardwood floor is, and pretty soon people are doing home improvement projects. I don't know if any of you during 2020 tried to find a contractor to come and make some change to your home, but I would bet you that you had trouble doing it, and when you contracted one, it was probably for months in the future before they could start, because the demand was so high. And also, even though they anticipated lower home building rates, they also, to preserve the economy, the Fed dropped interest rates. And so it became much more affordable to buy new homes and also to get loans for construction loans to remodel their house. All of this fed greatly into the demand side of the equation. And now we had a surging demand for lumber where it was anticipated that there was a dwindling demand. And at the same time, the supply was having trouble ramping up, keeping up with it. And let's not forget additional impacts of people working from home. People who worked in the city and had to commute into the city oftentimes lived in apartments in the city or townhomes or whatever. But as soon as they were able to work from home, that freed them up geographically. And so they were able to move out of the cities into more affordable housing in smaller towns and smaller outlying communities. So there was a fairly large exodus out of large cities into these gateway communities that were nearby, or they didn't even have to be nearby if you think about it, because you can do work from home if your home is anywhere. And so this had the impact of driving more demand for housing out in the suburbs and in the smaller communities, which just added to the demand for lumber. So I can't overestimate the impact of lower interest rates on this whole thing. The Fed, the Federal Reserve, dropped interest rates at the beginning of the pandemic, and they did this because they were trying to stimulate the economy and make sure that the economy did not crash. So low interest rates are the government's tool. Lowering and raising interest rates are a key government tool for helping the economy, whether it be in boom or whether it be in bust. And you lower interest rates in bust. And that's what happened. They lowered them to near zero. And they're only now beginning to raise them at all. And that isn't changing the interest rate very much. The interest rates are still low. Now, what impact do interest rates have to do on lumber? Interest rates, I already mentioned, have to do with people able to get construction loans. But just as importantly, they're able to get home mortgages that are very, very affordable compared to what they used to be. I mean, it's almost free money in terms of borrowing and paying it back. The interest component of it is very small. So suddenly going out and buying either a new home, your first home, or upgrading to a larger home became much more affordable for the average person. And at the same time, the demand went way up. There was no increase in the supply of housing because the builders were not building additional housing at that point in time. And so as a result, this fed into the lumber shortage. There are also some other factors involved here. It's little known that there was a Canadian beetle that cut into the pine tree crop, and it actually brought the supply of pine from Canada way down, maybe to a 15-year low. And then other factors include prices going up for labor, for gasoline, and for basic supplies. And unemployment was up, but the unemployment payments were up, so it was harder to find workers, so they had to pay more money per hour, and so the prices went up. That's another factor that goes into this. So to recap a little bit, this is a supply and demand equation, just like everything in economics and pricing. We saw the supply drop because the pandemic closed the labor yards and made it a slow restart, and they anticipated a low demand. But then we actually, because people were working at home and people had cheap money and they could get loans, we saw more home improvement and more demand for lumber, and because of cheap home prices, people wanted houses. So again, on the demand side, there was high demand. So we had lower supply, higher demand, and now you're in a situation where the result of that is shortages and raising of prices. And that's where we are, or that's where we were at the end of 2020 and into 2021. So let's talk about where we're going from here in this situation. What's gonna happen next? Understand, I don't have a crystal ball, and I don't know exactly what the Fed's gonna do, and I don't know exactly what the economy's gonna do, but some things I think we can be pretty sure of. First of all, I think that the lumber shortage is kind of at its peak right now, which is in the early summer of 2021. I believe that the supply side will increase pretty dramatically, and so you will begin to see some leveling off of prices and perhaps even see some price drops by the end of 2021. Then into 2022, I would see larger supply, continued high demand, but quite a bit larger supply, and so prices will level off and probably come back down closer to what they were. And I would expect in the following year, 2023, that prices would be back pretty much to normal and what we were used to paying before the pandemic in early 2020. So the process I'm suggesting going forward is that the prices are going to stabilize and then reduce over time. That's because housing demand, it has sort of reached a peak at the end of this frenzy that's going on right now. It may be more of a frenzy going forward, but eventually here and in the not too distant future, the housing is going to level off. Furthermore, like I said, I'm not the Fed and I don't have a crystal ball, but I think the Fed, because of inflation worries that you've been reading and hearing about, is going to be slowly raising interest rates in the near future. And that may actually accelerate. And when they do that, fewer people are going to be able to afford homes. So there'll be less of a demand on the demand side. And a lot of people who were looking for homes, the homes will then open up, they will get those, or they'll be priced out by higher interest rates. And so the demand for housing will go down. Meanwhile, the lumber yards are back up to full production, and they may even increase beyond full production going forward because they see a lot of money to be made. They see a lot of high demand. And so as interest rates go up, demand goes down, supply goes up, the prices come back down. And that's how I see the future. Now this is sort of an unusual video for me to do. I normally do woodworking videos and talk about how to and compare things in the woodworking arena. Now lumber is closely related, and because we're seeing people asking us questions about why is lumber price high, etc., I wanted to do this video to answer that and to give you some insight into that. Don't forget, our site has a lot of videos on regular woodworking stuff, and we encourage you to go take a look at that. And we encourage you to subscribe, and we ask you to like this if you like the content.